The Philadelphia Eagles take on the Carolina Panthers at home as they look to increase their win streak to 9 games. The Panthers have seen their offense improve as the season has gone on, but their defense is still one of the worst in the league. Currently 12-point favorites, the Eagles should come away with another victory as they fight for the number 1 seed. Welcome to the Philly Film Room podcast. Along with my co-host Eric Sidewater, I'm Nick Waters, and I think this will be our format going forward. I think, Eric, we don't have any more surprise weekends or surprise weeks coming up where we can't bring you on the preview podcast. So we should have Eric back for every week remaining going forward. But we are already on week 14 of the season, believe it or not. Next thing, before you know it, we're going to be talking about free agency and the draft. But we are currently on the march towards the championship. So that is a conversation for later. But make sure you appreciate the season because it is going by fast. And just get a little peek behind the curtains. I've teased a special announcement and a post in the past, and some things have gotten delayed, but I do want to talk about, I am in the works of creating a Discord for the channel so that we can build a community outside of just YouTube where people don't just have to wait for my videos to start conversations and comment. In addition to that, there's going to be some exclusive content on there as well for you guys, and it'll be especially important come draft season because a lot of the players that we talk about, you're actually not supposed to be putting on YouTube, and pretty much every video I did last year got demonetized, or some I just had to completely take down in general. But having said that, we want to talk about this week's game preview as we take on the Carolina Panthers. But as always, before we get to that, we want to get Eric's game thoughts from the Ravens game.
It was one of the most resilient games I've ever watched as an Eagles fan. They battled the referees. They battled bad fumble recovery luck, every single one going right back to the Ravens, and overcame all that and didn't bat an eye the whole time. Their offense stalling, but even when they're down 9-0, and then their defense just keeping them in the game, which we've seen that in previous weeks as well. So it's amazing that they don't seem to get flustered because I just thinking about last year, just once the dam broke, it was just a disaster, especially on the defensive end. So I think I'm crediting it to the youth injection. I'm crediting it to the new coordinators. But I think one of the things we discussed off the pod is I think that the position coaches need some acclaim. Now, it's very hard for us to determine how much of the credit should go to them and which specific coaches have been the most instrumental in these guys' development. But there's no way that these rookies are getting up to speed that fast on talent alone. And yeah, Fangio can design great game plans, but we talk about it all the time. Ultimately, it's your reads, it's your technique, the little nuances during the actual play that ultimately add up to whether you're successful or not. And the position coaches are the guys working with them all the time. So I want to shout out those guys, Christian Parker for one, the linebacker coach as well. Those two guys have to be doing a tremendous job. Clint Hurt is likely doing a tremendous job with these defensive linemen who some of these guys were called busts, and now they're stuffing the Ravens. So I just want to give all those guys a round of applause because I think they're doing a tremendous job. One other thing that I really noticed in that game is the tackling. It's just dramatically better. You could see how obvious it was of a coaching point that they were targeting where to hit Derrick Henry right in this upper thigh area right below the hip, and he was just taking him out every time, and almost every single guy was targeting that area. So I do recall Fangio saying they had studied some past games of like how to bring him down properly, so it came to fruition. These guys are really detailed in their preparation, and it shows up on game day. One of the best wins I can remember, regular season wins in my lifetime. The Ravens are a really good team. And it's not like they were missing any of their impact players. So that all around, I was just impressed. How about for you? Anything to add?
Yeah, I mean, just great game, great ability to overcome adversity. Some things that just weren't going their way, or lesser teams would have let hold them down. That's championship mentality right there. To take those punches, roll with them, and then bounce back and come out strong on the other side. And you make a great point about giving love to these position coaches. In previous podcasts, I talked about Jamal Singleton as the running backs coach, but you talked about Clint Hurt. You got three of their defensive linemen, interior defensive linemen, are top 10 in pass rush win rate, including Milton Williams, first in pass rush win rate. These guys are having career years. They're playing to their potential. That is a large part the scouting department finding the right guys and finding the right guys for the coaching staff, but also the coaching staff getting the most out of these guys so that they can live up to their potential. So, yeah, everything you said, you hit the nail on the head, especially with giving props to those position coaches. A lot of time we just give praise to the head coach and the coordinator, but at the end of the day, those coordinators are really coming up with the game plans. It is the position coaches that have to go and get everything working within the machine, right? So, and they're oiled machine right now. But let's jump into this game preview of the Panthers. And as we look at this Panthers team, we're going to start with their offense. Their offense is led by head coach and former offensive coordinator Dave Canales. Their current offensive coordinator is Brad Idzik, and it's headlined by names like Bryce Young and Chuba Hubbard. This team is lacking a lot of talent in a lot of places, so this is not the team with the most firepower that this Eagles defense has faced, but it's still professional sports, so we have to look out for everyone. The team is currently 30th in points per game, 30th in yards per game, 24th in yards per play, and 28th in EPA per play. So this is definitely a step down in offenses that we've faced over the past several weeks. When we look at this Panthers offense on film and what they do schematically, they really want to be a balanced offense. When we look at their run pass ratios, they're currently 7th highest in pass rate, but a lot of that comes down to the fact that they're trailing in a lot of these games and they have to throw more to catch up. But in neutral situations or situations when they're tied, they are 15th in pass rate. When they're leading, they're 12th in pass rate. So they want to be a team that is a little bit more balanced, but they're not a team that tries to live at any end of the spectrum. And they're not really good enough like the Eagles in one specific area where they can just lean into a specific part of their game like the Eagles do, right? But in addition to that, they have a balanced mix of using shotgun, under center, pistol, fairly balanced in their usage. Different personnel usages, whether it's 11 personnel or 12 personnel. On one set of drives, they will be in condensed sets, and then they'll come out and much more spread sets. So they kind of do a lot of different things on the offense. There's not really one thing you can kind of nail down that they do in specific. Overall, I do think this is a solid offensive line. They're 12th in pressure rate allowed, according to Next Gen Stats. They're 12th in yards before contact, according to Next Gen Stats. They don't generate a lot of explosive plays, though, partly due to their weapons. They're just not an explosive team overall, partly due to their quarterback and what his strengths are and what his play style is. In the passing game, they mainly target the underneath and intermediate areas, but we'll get into some of their players to look out for. But Eric, did you have anything to add to that in terms of this Carolina Panthers offense?
Yeah, when I'm scouting these teams, I always try to kind of create a mental model of what is their offensive identity? What are their tendencies? You talked about formation wise, personnel packages, concepts, and a little bit like the Eagles, I think they're a bit of a kitchen sink offense where they'll employ it all, as you mentioned. So they're hard to pin down. Not necessarily that I would call them vanilla, but it's not a lot of exotic stuff with lots of window dressing or multiple motions, or crazy formations like you might see with like Chiefs or 49ers or something. So it's a fairly straightforward attack, the concepts you see all the time by every team, but probably a little bit less predictable because they can kind of come out and do anything at any time. And so I think that's good for the Eagles, and because they have to be ready for all kinds of different ways that they'll be attacked. In some of these past weeks, they've known exactly what these teams are going to come out and do, and it's just a question of executing. And Fangio really could have a specific game plan. I don't necessarily think that's as true for the Panthers. I think it's going to be more generalized and probably change on the fly to figure out what they're trying to do on that specific day. So they've put up some points against some of these solid defenses. I don't think this is an anemic offense, even though they have a talent deficit. So yeah, their Eagles are not gonna be able to just show up and win. They'll still have to play.
Yeah, and again, this is professional sports. You have to come prepared to play. I think a lot of times we look at professional sports and we kind of compare it to, or we think in our mind, like, compare it a little bit to college and high school. There's a huge talent discrepancy between high school and college teams, between the best teams and even the middle of the pack team. There's not a huge discrepancy in talent between the top teams in the NFL and the bottom teams in the NFL. I know sometimes it might appear that way, but these are still professional athletes. These are the top 1% of the 1% playing on these teams, right? So if you come out and you're not prepared to play, these guys can still go and make crazy highlight plays. The thing about being one of the best in a professional setting, they can all make insane plays, right? But it's which players can make those plays more consistently, which players can be good more consistently. And that's really the difference between the top teams and everyone else, right? But looking at some of the players that this Panthers offense has, we need to start with their quarterback, Bryce Young, former number 1 overall pick of the 2023 draft. He is statistically having one of the worst years of any quarterback this year, and that's really illustrated by his passer rating, which is 39th out of the 42 qualifying quarterbacks this year. But he has shown improvement over the year. Since week 8, his passer rating of 83.5 ranks 27 out of the 36 qualifying quarterbacks over that span. That is up from 74.0 for the entirety of the season. So he has improved, but it's not like he is one of the best quarterbacks out there. Now, he does move well in the pocket. If you get pressure on him, he is able to escape. He has some pretty good pocket presence. His processing is getting quicker. He's getting through his reads faster, and he's really at his best when he can throw with touch and anticipation. But I did mention he's still not performing great, and I don't think he is going to have a ton of success against the Eagles. It's going to be hard for me to think that he will after the performances we've had against Lamar Jackson and Jaden Daniels and Matt Stafford and Joe Burrow. I can't really look at Bryce Young and be like, yeah, he's going to come in and light this Eagles defense up. Currently, his average time to throw is 24th in the league. He will attack the short and intermediate areas. He's 14th in average depth of throw, which seems like he is pushing down the ball down the field a fair amount, but he's 38th in average depth of throw on passes that travel 20 plus yards down the field. So he's not really attacking and pushing the ball down the field. He doesn't have a big arm, so he's not a guy that's going to really laser balls into tight windows or be able to just chuck the ball down the field. He is fairly inaccurate. His completion percentage ranks 39 out of the 42 qualifying quarterbacks. His adjusted completion percentage ranks 40th. And like I mentioned, he will scramble and find space when he is pressured. His scramble rate overall is 14th. His pressured scramble rate is 10th. For reference, Jalen Hurts is 11th. And his non-pressured scramble rate is 19th. So is he scrambling the most in the league? No, but if you get pressure on him, he has enough mobility to hurt you a little bit with his legs. But Eric, what did you think about Bryce Young?
When watching him, I just couldn't get it out of my head how much he reminded me of Kyler Murray. Now, I know it may seem like lazy analysis because he's like a short quarterback who's mobile, but just within the play style, how the ball comes out of his hands, I think there's a lot of similarities. I don't think he's to the athleticism of Murray. I don't think he's to the talent level, and I don't think he has as strong of an arm, which is probably why he won't end up being as good as Kyler Murray. But he extends plays. He'll throw on the move. He's had some really impressive throws on the run. In fact, some that I think are probably better than Hurts. When he's throwing down the field outside the numbers, he's terrible. I don't even think he can make the throw. You mentioned how he doesn't have a big arm. When he's throwing like 15 yards and under, he's got quite a bit of snap on it. But as soon as he has to throw it across the field or downfield, it's a lollipop. And so if I were the Eagles, I may be jumping the gun a little bit here, is you can just squeeze the field and force him to throw deep outside, and there's just no way he's completing those. So yeah, I think dramatically better in the last few weeks than he looked coming out. So they were probably smart for benching him for a couple games. And I could see him developing into a adequate quarterback, like someone that you could actually go out there and win games with. But yeah, like you mentioned, his lack of an arm and his size is always going to be a detriment. I actually think if I were the Panthers, I would try to design more like runs or design scrambles, get him moving more. Because when he gets frozen in the pocket and pressure starts to come, he'll just backpedal and then chuck it into the ground, almost Kirk Cousins-esque. But as soon as he starts getting out of the pocket, he looks way more fluid, or if he's moving forward as he's throwing. So, yeah, I think they should really lean into the mobility more and not let him try to be a pocket passer the whole game.
Yeah, it's one of those interesting things that he's going to stick around the league as a starting quarterback probably for some time. But is he a guy that you win because of? I don't know if he's ever going to be that guy. Yeah, I mean, it's still pretty early in his career, and we've seen a number of guys, improve over the years, right? But it might be one of those things where, at the quarterback position, you're really searching for guys that you can win because of. I don't know if Bryce Young is ever going to get to that point, but we have seen improvement, so he is on the right trajectory. He was picked first overall for a reason, so we'll see how his career progresses. But looking at some of their other players on offense, at running back, we have Chuba Hubbard. He is really a workhorse back. He is getting 76% of the non-quarterback rushes, so a heavy workload for Chuba Hubbard, and he just got a big contract from the Panthers after they went out and drafted Jonathan Brooks at running back in the second round. So that tells you how much that they think about this guy. He's currently 6th in the NFL among qualifying running backs and rushing yards over expectation per attempt. He's currently 10th in total missed tackles forced. He churns out solid yards, but he doesn't break a ton of big runs. He doesn't necessarily have home run ability or that angle breaking speed, as he's 39th in explosive run rate. He has good vision and footwork. He uses subtle hesitations and movement to make guys miss and confine spaces. He has good balance. He's a tough runner. He will also be used in the pass game as well. He's tied for 17th of all running backs in receptions, although he's only 40th in receiving yards, so a pretty low average yards per reception. Now, he does have 4 fumbles on the year, which is the 5th highest among all running backs, and the Eagles are first in forced fumbles. So, and that's really a microcosm of a good defense and getting hats to the ball. So I think this could be an opportunity where they're able to punch a ball out and hopefully recover one of these balls that ends up on the ground this week. But Eric, what'd you think about Chuba Hubbard and the running back room?
Yeah, you mentioned good in confined spaces. That's what really stuck out to me. Many reps where I saw there was almost no hole and he would squeeze through and get 5-6 yards, and he does that regularly. That's why his yards per attempt is really solid. And yeah, like you mentioned, not a home run threat, but a very well balanced back. Pretty much, not that dissimilar to Kyron Williams. He's probably a little more elusive, and probably a little bit less power. But yeah, good all around back. Brooks is someone who I'm interested in watching develop. You are right to say Hubbard is a bell cow, but now Brooks is healthy. That might even out considerably in their amount of reps they get, especially because I don't think Hubbard is a receiving threat. So you may see them go to Brooks on passing downs. I'm not too familiar about their pass protection abilities. Brooks seems like he runs with more power, and it's a shame that he had that major injury out of college because he may have been like a first round back before that. So I know you're a Texas guy, so that was probably brutal, but he's probably, I mean, we know the recovery history for ACL, so I could see in the future then kind of being a 50-50 split, and that's 2 good backs. So yeah, overall, if the Eagles are gonna lose somehow, it would be because they get gashed on the ground repeatedly. So yeah, I definitely think we need to be prepared for these backs.
Yeah, I do think that over time their workloads are going to condense a little bit. Right now, we're seeing the Panthers are working Jonathan Brooks back. He's not getting a heavy workload currently. He ended up with 3 receptions last week, so I was like, oh, he must be taking a lot of the receiving snaps. But I think he had like 5 receiving snaps total in the last game, so he just ended up getting targeted. And I don't think they were specific. They didn't appear to be, for the most part, routes designed specifically to go to him. The ball just ended up finding him, but I agree with you. Brooks is definitely the better receiving back. He's more explosive as well, so he's going to be that guy that's probably going to be more of their home run threat once he gets fully back up to speed. He did have some complications, it sounds like, with his recovery. He was someone that was supposed to come back a little bit earlier this season, but he kept getting pushed and pushed, and he almost missed the deadline to be able to come back this season. If you start the season on injured reserve, there's a deadline when you have to come back or you're out for the year. The Panthers pushed him all the way till that deadline, then activated him, and he really didn't start getting playing time until Miles Sanders got hurt. So I do wonder if where he's at in his recovery. But having said that, let's move on to some of their other players. The receiving core just it doesn't have a whole lot of talent overall, but we do need to talk about some of their players. First of all, Xavier Legette, he is their first round pick from this past draft, so he is a rookie. He is a traits guy. He is big, physical, and fast. I will say he's more of a straight line speed kind of guy than he is really a shifty kind of guy. And you're going to kind of get that when you see guys that are built like he is built. But he is a good red zone threat using his body to box out in tight spaces. He's physical at the top of the route to create separation. But I do think he's better as a number 2 or a number 3, as I don't think he is very fast or smooth out of his breaks. But I do think he is a yak threat. And so he would probably work best running crossing routes, drag routes, slants, things like that. But I don't know if he's going to be your guy that go to on third down when you need to beat man coverage. I don't know if he's really going to develop into that guy. If he does, it's going to be winning with by creating separation with his physicality at the top of the route. And oftentimes that ends up being a guy that is a lot of contested catches. You can still win like that, but I do wonder if he is ever going to develop into a true number 1. And then is that a guy you really want to take in the first round? I don't know, but he can create explosive plays if you give him the ball in specific situations like those drag routes and crossing routes. But I don't think that he really trusts his hands, and we never ended up doing a breakdown on this guy in the offseason. But I had talked with Eric, and just on film, he didn't look like he was a natural hands catcher. He would double catch a lot of passes. He didn't have a very high drop rate his final season in college, but he didn't look like a guy that was a natural catching the ball. Interestingly enough, it was like the hardest passes where he had to sky up and jump over someone, where he looked like when he didn't have to think about catching it, and it was more of just reacting and making a play. He went out and then he looked like a natural hands catcher. But if he had to catch like a hitch or a slant, oftentimes, and you still see this to this day, he jumps in the air to catch with his body and slows his momentum. When you jump in the air like that, you're not able to catch and immediately pierce up the field. You have to wait to land on the ground. And by that time, a lot of times the defense has recovered. And when you look at him right now in the NFL, he currently has a drop rate of 14%, which is the 10th highest of all receivers in the league. So I do think he has a little bit of trust issues in his hands. Looking at Adam Thielen, he is probably their best receiver right now. If there's a go-to guy against man coverage, it's probably going to be Adam Thielen. He is getting older, but he is still reliable. He's going to find and be in the right spots. He's going to find spots and zone to settle down and be a target for Bryce Young. He has good hands, tracking, and body control. You never really lose that once you have that skill. You just start to lose your athleticism. But he does line up primarily in the slot, which I think will be interesting because they have a young player in Jalen Coker who also aligns in the slot. So I wonder how much he's going to play. He's been injured since Adam Thielen got back. So I wonder how that breakdown of playing time is going to work, where you have probably the better receiver right now is Adam Thielen, but he's not going to be here long term. So how do you balance who is going to get that playing time? But Eric, what do you think about some of the receivers and the receiving core?
Thielen, I think where you really gotta worry about him is on man coverage. He's very deceptive in his route running, although he has lost some of his athleticism, as you mentioned. He's mastered the craft. That's why he's in the NFL, and he has some unbelievable highlight catches this year. So I'm really worried. Well, I'm not worried about him, but focusing on him in man coverage, you don't want to lose him, especially down the field. Coker, he looks really promising. He's a guy I had scouted in the process. He came from some unknown school in a low division, but he's a big body and he moves well at that size. He's like all of 6'3" and physical at the catch point, and he'll catch it and not break stride. I wouldn't be surprised to see him develop into a solid receiver. He is probably someone who is best suited out of the slot, as you mentioned. You used to think, 6'3" with some movement abilities, that's an X receiver. You stick on the outside. I don't think that's true anymore. I think there's way more of a space in the game for big slots, and especially ones who can go over the middle, catch it in stride, and get yak threats, because a lot of these completions are under 20 yards nowadays. So yeah, Coker, to me, he's probably the biggest. He's probably one of their best big play threats. Although Leggett is huge and runs a 4.3, I really just don't see him breaking big touchdowns. Like, he had that one in college that people played a million times that went viral, but that was it. So, to me, I would be more focused on Coker than Leggett. I think he looks promising.
Yeah, now moving on to the trenches and our weekly question of who was blocking Jalen Carter. And this week, Robert Hunt is going to be up to the task. Robert Hunt was a offseason signing by the Carolina Panthers. They went out and gave him a big contract. They also gave a big contract to their other guard, left guard Damian Lewis. I think the Panthers identified that they really needed to firm up their pocket and the interior, especially having a quarterback like Bryce Young, who was undersized. You want to make sure that you create a firm pocket. So I think they went out and paid, maybe overpaid, for some of their guards. Robert Hunt is going to be the guy matching up with Jalen Carter. And while he is an upgrade over who they had last year, I still think this is going to be a matchup advantage for Carter. There's going to be very few guards who I'm not going to say that about. I still think this is a matchup advantage for Carter. He is he did get that big contract, but I would say he's probably slightly underperforming what his expectations were. When you look at the system that he came from in Miami, they ran a ton of RPOs, a lot of screen passes, a lot of play actions. So that really protects your offensive lineman from having to get into true drop back passing sets. And that allowed Hunt to probably look a little better than what he was. And he ultimately cashed that in the offseason. But looking at him in pass pro, he really likes using long strikes to get his hands on quickly, but you'll often see him overextending. And in order to beat that, I think Jalen Carter can use stutter and jab steps to draw the hands out and then hit him with his patented club move, or use a double swipe move, or just try and get around the edge. He'll also get into a high pad level, so I think he can be bull rushed in certain circumstances as well. And when you look at him overall, he currently ranks 46th out of 83 qualifying offensive guards and pressure rate allowed. Looking at the rest of their offensive line, overall, I think this is a better run blocking unit than a pass blocking unit. But we got to look at left guard Damian Lewis, and really we got to start talking about Milton Williams and who is going to be blocking him. Because, like I said, Milton Williams is first in pass rush win rate. Damian Lewis, I think, is probably the better of the two guards. He is big and powerful. He has some devastating blocks on film. Against the run, especially last week, he was running Vita Vea off the ball. And that is not an easy guy to move. So I'll be interested to see his matchup, because he's going to be matched up more against Jordan Davis on early down. So that'll be an interesting matchup to watch out for. I think he's going to have the advantage on the ground against Milton Williams and Moro Ojomo. But I expect them to try and win, those guys in particular, to try and win with quickness, trying to backdoor some of the blocks. If they try and outmuscle Damian Lewis, I don't think that's going to work out for Milton and Ojomo. So we'll have to see how that plays out. But overall, I think he's been pretty good in pass pro. His pressure rate allowed is 23rd out of those 83 qualifying offensive guards. He has a strong anchor, but I'll say this, he will get caught leaning at times. He will really lean into guys so that he can dig into his anchor. He can get push-pulled, or he'll lose to secondary moves when guys have to transition to their secondary counter move. And when he gets off balance, you'll see him fall on his face a good amount of times. But again, 23rd out of 83 qualifying guards in pressure rate allowed. So he has been pretty solid. But I do think there will be some times when Milton will be able to get after him. Left tackle Ike Ekwonu, he was a pretty high pick. I think a top 5 or maybe 6 overall pick a couple years ago. Again, I think he's a good run blocker. He really excels on the backside of cutoff runs, on zone runs away, and that pairs really well with Damian Lewis. Damian Lewis creates a lot of movement on going one way, and then Ike Ekwonu comes through and has a cutoff block on the backside, and then you see lanes start to part. So you often see Chuba Hubbard hit the cutback, and he finds a crease behind those guys. So pay attention to that in this game. But he's not as good in pass pro. His pressure rate allowed is 52nd out of the 85 qualifying offensive tackles. He doesn't get much range with his first step out of his stance. I think that is a coaching choice on how they like to get into pass pro. As a result, he'll often end up turning his shoulders early when he feels threatened around the edge. That creates a soft edge to get around, or it opens up inside counters. When he goes to strike guys, he doesn't use these long, straight punches. He uses what's called circle strikes, or you'll sometimes hear it called clamps. Instead of using the straight punches, he uses these circle strikes because he is wanting to take away his arms from getting chopped and knocked away. But what that does is that exposes your chest, and you really have to be confident in your ability to anchor down when that happens. And I don't think he has the greatest anchor in the world, but that is something to pay attention to. I think Josh Sweat, he is going to be going against Ekwonu. I think he's a guy that should get a good amount of pressures in this game. I would pick Josh Sweat to get a sack, but I think he's probably going to be most successful using his long arm series of pass rush moves. So set up Ekwonu with a long arm bull rush, and then as he starts to draw his hands out a little bit quicker, hit him with some stab chops or some stab rip moves and dip under. There's a number of times on film where he lost 2 guys bending under and hitting him with rip moves. Looking at the right tackle, Taylor Moton. He is one of the best right tackles in the NFL. He has been a good player over the past several years, even in bad circumstances. So that speaks to how good he is overall as a player. But they're probably not going to get a ton of pressure against Moton. He's currently 3rd out of the 85 qualifying offensive tackles and pressure rate allowed. Second is Lane Johnson. First is Tristan Wirfs. They do have a backup at center and Cade Mays. So if they want to get some targeted pressure against a certain player, I'd like to see Jalen Carter line head up on Mays on specific third downs. But Eric, what do you think about this offensive line overall?
Yeah, I don't think they have a giant weakness, maybe that center. But I think more it's like how they operate as a unit. I saw times where they're simply not picking up pressures, sliding away or to the wrong direction. And, part of that's attributable to coaching. Part of that's attributable to rookie quarterback or whatever. He plays like a rookie quarterback. So overall, I'm not necessarily thinking like, oh, one-on-one, we're going to just dominate this guy in this specific matchup, although Jalen Carter is capable of doing that any week. But I think it's going to be like, you definitely can scheme up pressures. I think they're going to have trouble handling stunts. I think they're going to have trouble if we bring pressure from depth like Bond or Dean. I easily can envision Dean screaming up the A gap I've seen reps where they'll have Hunt and Moton. So I guess that's just like a free jet protection where you just have a 3-man slide to the left and then Dean could just come screaming up the A gap. I could envision that. So overall, not a bad unit by any means. Like you mentioned, really solid in run blocking, but just uninspiring in how they pass block as a unit. So I think the Eagles will be able to drum up plenty of pressures.
Yeah, and part of the issues with their picking up protections is probably due to the fact they've ended up having to play 3 different guys at center. Their starting center who came over from Cleveland, he got hurt pretty early in the season. They had another guy playing center at one point in time, and then Cade Mays is playing right now. And then the guy that was playing center, I forgot his name, that was playing center before Cade Mays, he also had to play some left tackle at certain points in the year. So they've had to kind of shuffle around their line a little bit. So I can think that probably speaks to not totally being a cohesive unit, but in the run game, they're pretty good and playing on the same page. Now, I'm getting ahead of myself. Looking at the Eagles' defensive game plan and how you would slow down this Carolina Panthers offense, what would you do or what would you focus on, Eric?
Keep Bryce Young in the pocket. When you just converge on him and he's starting to backpedal, he can't hurt you at all. It's really when, like I mentioned earlier, when he's moving forward or if he breaks the pocket and then he starts moving parallel to the line of scrimmage, he can make some nice throws down the field or beat you with his legs. His speed is pretty solid. I would stack the box versus their heavy sets. They're pretty predictable in tipping off their runs. They'll come out in 1st and 10 with a couple tight ends on the field, condensed, and they'll just do a straight up run play. I don't have a problem putting 7-8 guys in the box because we mentioned it. They're not a big explosive play threat. And don't fall asleep on Adam Thielen and man coverage. You can think you have him and then the play gets extended a little bit and then he'll break open in a scramble drill. And as you mentioned, he's really good with his body control, catching it on the sidelines, overall, just hauling it in. So you don't need to do anything exotic. Like I said earlier, because they have such a varied approach, I don't think the game plan will be hyper specific. I think they'll be more fluid. And so, yeah, just play solid fundamental defense like they have been. The pressures will come. And they don't have enough receiving threats to really exploit us. So that's what I would try to do. How about for you?
Yeah, there's not like a receiver like this is the Bengals where the ball is going to Jamar Chase 30% of the time and then T. Higgins 25% of the time, right? So it's not like there's a guy you have to take away in this offense. So I don't think you're going to see like targeted coverages. You make a good point. Make sure you keep Bryce Young in the pocket. I touched on the fact he's 10th highest in scramble rate when pressured. So it's not a guy where you can just go and get out of your pass rush lanes, right? So you can't just willingly take an inside counter if you're not going to go and get the guy. If you're going to take that inside counter, it needs to be on situations where you're running a stunt and you have a defensive tackle looping back around, right? So you still need to maintain good pass rush lane integrity against the Carolina Panthers. But I would also play a higher amount of cover one. This Panthers offense has struggled when they face more cover one. And part of that reason is because of the fact that they don't have many weapons on the team that are really going to threaten you, right? And when we look at Bryce Young, his passer rating against cover one ranks 34 out of the 40 qualifying quarterbacks, completion percentage 36, and his pressure rate is the 7th highest. Against other coverages, his passer rating is 67.9 versus 77.4 against other coverages. This is according to Sports Info Solutions. His completion percentage is 47.6% versus 63.7% among other coverages. And then his pressure rate is 43.5% versus 30% when facing other coverages. So I'd run more man coverage. And then as well, to kind of piggyback on that, I would run, when they run cover three, I'd run more of their match zone cover three as opposed to their spot drop cover three. We saw against the Ravens, they ran a good amount of their spot drop cover three. I think in large part was due to, number one, the way they run it is they often place a safety in the middle of the field, and that will help take away some of the crossing routes that the Ravens like to run. But in addition to that, it would help keep eyes on Lamar Jackson because in match cover three, it often ends up playing out like cover one, but you don't have a guy that you can dedicate as a spy player in those situations. So I would play more match zone cover three in this game. It's going to play out a lot like cover one. So you're going to get a lot of the same benefits of playing cover one as you would playing match cover three. And then you touched on it earlier, because of the fact that they don't push the ball down the field, they really live in their intermediate to short area. Sit on routes, make them beat you deep, right? Because Bryce Young's probably not going to connect on those passes down the sideline, deep down the sideline, right? But he is going to take throws like digs, deep curl routes, things like that. So if you can sit and wait on that, you can really take the air out of the offense. You can smother these guys, hopefully get a tip pass that leads to an interception, something like that. So sit on some routes. But like you said, there's not like a specific player or thing you need to take away from this offense. They do so many different things that I don't think there's like anything you need to do, like any designer coverages or designer fronts that you need to run or something like that, right? You just need to go out there and play your game, play good fundamentals, gap sound and the run game, play good leverage and coverage, rally to the ball, all the things that this defense has been doing since week 6, right? But we do need to mention some injuries. Darius Slay has come back to practice this week. Reed Blankenship is in concussion protocol. We'll see if he makes it back this game. If not, Tristan McCollum should step in, and he looked pretty good in the reps that he got to play against the Ravens. So if he has to play, especially against the Panthers, I'd like to see what Tristan McCollum can bring for this defense. But switching to the other side of the ball and looking at this defense, it is led by defensive coordinator Ejiro Evero, and it's headlined by names like Jaycee Horn and Jadeveon Clowney. Very much like we saw with the offense, they don't have a whole lot of talent on this defensive side of the ball as well, and that shows out in the numbers. Currently, they rank 32nd in points per game, 31st in yards per game, 28th in yards per play, and 30th in EPA per play. So this Eagles offense should feast again this week. But Eric, what did you see from this defense on tape?
I should lead out with this. Their defensive line gets no pressure. It's unbelievable, and it's the undoing of their defense. In fact, they have 22 fewer pressures, and there's various charting services, but they're the lowest on every charting service than the second to last ranked team. So they're orders of magnitude worse in getting pressures, and it's bizarre because they don't do anything to try to make up for it. It's not like they're doing zero pressure. It's not like they're doing a ton of stunts or anything. So much so that I feel like they're almost content with losing. They play a lot of single high zone. They have a very low percentage of snaps using man coverage, and if I had that personnel, I wouldn't go in man coverage either. They play a lot of base personnel, especially like on early downs or against like 12 and 13 personnel from the offenses. They'll stick a bunch of defensive linemen out there. When they do bring 5, it's pretty much 5 linemen. It's not like they are walking up a bunch of mug linebackers with 3 defensive linemen and doing anything exotic like that. It's very straightforward. I will say this. They play with a lot of heart. I see them flying around. I see them celebrating with their coaches and teammates. And for a team that has that record, it's admirable. When they do blitz, it's predominantly with a 3-high shell. And like I mentioned, they'll just bring 1 extra. So pretty much none of these pressures are what had give Hurts problems in the past. Really, that's when they bring 6 and 7 guys. So they're, from a scheme perspective, they should be pretty easy to beat. I did see they fooled Mayfield repeatedly. What a terrible game he had on film. So who knows? Maybe they're getting a little more creative in more recent weeks, doing stuff different than what they had showed on film, because Mayfield picked apart the Eagles and then completely got stymied for big parts of the game against the Panthers. They had a lot of pass defended. So you're, like we mentioned it, they're professionals, but in terms of the scheme, they're not doing themselves any favors to make up for their talent deficit. Anything else that you saw?
Yeah, well, they had, they did frustrate Baker Mayfield, but the thing is, you got to stop the Eagles' bread and butter, which is the run game. And the Carolina Panthers, I mean, maybe they'll do it, but I mean, that's going to be that one time out of 100 that they do it, right? Because when you look at them on tape and their metrics, they're currently last in the league in yards per game allowed, 166.8 yards per game allowed on the ground. I believe they're allowing 18 more yards than the second place team. They're not very good. Yards per attempt, they're 27th. Yards before contact, 28th. Yards after contact, they're 11th allowed, which I thought was interesting. Well, that's according to Next Gen Stats. Sports Info Solutions had them at 24th in yards after contact allowed. So again, you got to look at these different, these grading services and take everything with a grain of salt. But when you look at them on film, it's just not a good run defense. And then you look at their stuff rate, they're 31st in stuff rate. So they're not creating a lot of negative plays on the ground. And when you're playing an Eagles team like this, if you can't stop them on the ground, you're not going to stop this team. And you look at the Eagles, they ran on the Ravens last week. Really, in that fourth quarter, they came up big after struggling for a good portion of the early part in the game, trying to run the ball, or at least they looked more like a normal team trying to run the ball, going against the best run defense in the NFL. Now they face the worst run defense in the NFL. I am excited to see what Saquon Barkley does, but if they get up so big in this game, you might see a good amount of Kenny Gainwell, and maybe we start to see a little bit of Will Shipley. But they have to take care of business first. Their defensive line is just not very stout, especially with Derek Brown out for the year. He was definitely one of the best interior run-stopping defensive linemen, but he got hurt, I believe it was in week 1, and they have struggled since. Their linebackers aren't the greatest in the world getting off blocks, and they often have their safeties rotating from the top down to fit into the run. And there are times when it looks like their safety is supposed to be fitting into like the A gap, which can be a tough ask, especially when you're coming from the top down. So it'll be interesting to see what happens on the ground. But just to touch on some of the other things you said, a ton of cover 3, second highest rate in the NFL. They primarily play a lot of match cover 3. They will play some spot drop cover 3, but that's more of a changeup. Again, that ends up playing out a lot like cover 1, but that takes more communication, and you'll see some blown coverages as a result. They do play outside of cover 3. They play a good amount of cover 6, the cover 6 and cover 8 variations that we see, like the Eagles run. It plays out very similar to how the Eagles play their cover 6 and cover 8. Against trips, they'll often use coverage variations whether it's cover 3 or their cover 6 looks, where they have their weak safeties responsible for matching number 3 on vertical and crossing routes. I think that's an area where you can game plan some explosive pass plays against them. They're currently 6th highest in disguise rate and 2nd highest in rate of off coverage. So I think we're probably gonna see some curl routes from AJ Brown, maybe some curls, some comebacks, maybe a deep out route here or there to attack this team. But in terms of their coverage, 26th in yards per attempt, 28th in completion percentage, 30th in passer rating, 32nd in pressure rates. That's according to Next Gen Stats. 28th in sack rate. But they have had 9 sacks over their last 2 games, so maybe things are turning around. But when we look at some of their players that they have on defense, let's start with the defensive line. They have Jadeveon Clowney. It's probably their best pass rusher, but he's going against Lane Johnson, so I'm not going to sit here and wax poetic about Jadeveon Clowney. He's currently 41st out of 111 qualifying defensive ends on pressure rate. His pass rush win rate is 45th, so this should be a fairly easy matchup for Lane Johnson. Jadeveon Clowney is a good athlete. He is pretty powerful, but you're going against an elite all-time offensive tackle like Lane Johnson. It usually takes a little bit of a better talent to challenge him. They have had DJ Wonnum, who they signed in the offseason. Not a huge contract, but they did go out and sign Wonnum. He's come back, stepped back into the lineup in week 10. He had a bit of a rough start to the year in terms of he was coming off of a torn quad last December. He had 3 separate surgeries to overcome this, and then he had blood clots. So it's been a rough go for him, but it sounds like he's got his health and everything back in order, and he finally got back onto the field in week 10. Since week 10, his pressure rates, his metrics don't qualify because he hasn't played enough snaps, but if they did, he'd be tied for 16th in pressure rate allowed, and he's 17th in pass rush win rate. But I will say this, most of the pressures he's been generating has been against bad offensive tackles, against the Chiefs and against the Giants. He did have one nice pressure against Tristan Wirfs, but outside of that, he's mainly been getting pressures against bad offensive tackles, plus some stunts and cleanup pressures. And when we look at DJ Wonnum, last year, Mailata handled him pretty well. So he was stonewalled in their 2023 matchup. That's going to be the primary guy that he's lined up against. I think Mailata should be able to handle him easily. They should be able to give Jalen Hurts a ton of time to pass. They get virtually no pressure up the interior from their interior defensive linemen. So Jalen should have a lot of time to throw the ball. Looking at what I think is their best player on the defense is Jaycee Horn. I think he is one of the better corners in the NFL. He is big and well built. He is 6 foot and he is over 205 pounds. He's a very good and explosive athlete. I personally think he's best in press. He has good patient feet at the line of scrimmage. He uses good offhand jam to squeeze receivers and get in phase. He does a great job of squeezing routes to the sideline, and he's pretty good understanding his assignment. If he knows you're a back shoulder fade kind of guy, he will play through that back shoulder, right? And if he knows he's stacked on top of the receiver and he has a certain body positioning, knowing what type of passes that a quarterback will throw on fade routes, he's going to play the receiver accordingly. He's also good, but I'd say he's more inconsistent in off coverage. There's at times he will play too loose and allow space on curls, outs, and comebacks. But when he is locked down, particularly in third down, he will sit on routes and play aggressively. He has the mobility and recovery speed to flip his hips and get back in phase if he sits on a route and it ends up being a longer developing route. He does a good job understanding down and distance formation and opposing wide receivers' tendencies. And he will flip sides and travel with receivers, or he'll be the guy when in trips formations, he will be the lone corner on the backside because usually that's the guy and ending up playing man coverage against these solo receivers. So he will flip sides and travel with receivers. I expect he's probably going to travel a fair amount with A.J. Brown and the game. He's also physical in run support. He has the most run stops among corners, and he will blitz some as well, although not a whole lot, but he will blitz a little bit. He's currently 21st out of 129 qualifying corners in yards per target allowed, 27th in forced incompletion rate. And this is even more impressive. His numbers are even more impressive because he travels with the best receiver and he's lacking support among the rest of the defense in terms of the pass rush that he's able to generate. And then just the other talent on the team isn't that good as well. So when you see 21st in yards per target allowed, well, that's not that great. You got to remember when you're not playing with great teammates, it's harder to look as good in those scenarios. But Eric, what did you think about some of these players on the Panthers defense?
The defensive line, I'll just take another opportunity to highlight how bad they are. A'Shawn Robinson, he's a huge guy, and he kind of just like plugs up gaps just being wide. Although he's immobile, but he's pretty strong. But outside of him, they are diminutive on the interior line. They're small guys who just get blasted off the ball. I could see Mekhi Becton getting pancakes, Dickerson, all of them, honestly. So I don't want to jump the gun, but I think we can exploit their interior defensive line in the run game specifically. Horn is awesome. I think he's one of the most underrated players in the NFL because he's on this team that nobody cares about. And he probably let up a few big plays that he wouldn't have had he was like on a contender in high leverage games. There's on offense they say catch radius. There's not really a term for that on defense, but like his deflection radius is insane between his range, how high he can jump, and his arms that are like go gadget arms. It's really tough to get one like over him if he's in phase, or like in the guy's hip pocket, he'll just go up and swat it down with ease. So I mean, you could throw at him. It's not like he's gonna be getting pick sixes or anything like that, but it's like why they have so many other guys that can easily be exploited in that defense. Fuller, their safety, he's cooked, and this is like the fourth safety in the last 5 weeks we faced who's cooked, who used to be decent. And you know, the rest of their secondary is like replacement level players. I almost don't want to like criticize them because no one has high expectations for these guys, and I'm sure they'll be replaced next year if the Panthers are actually trying to be contenders. The linebackers are not inspiring. I think Josie Jewell is like a nice third linebacker to have. He can, because he's like, you know, a heady player who plays with, you know, pretty good fundamentals, but he doesn't pop. He doesn't have much athleticism. And then the opposite of that is their rookie linebacker Wallace, who some Eagles fans are probably familiar with in the pre-draft process, looking at linebackers. He's highly athletic, but very raw and unpolished at this point. Doesn't seem to have good like gap integrity and run fits. You mentioned it; he'll get washed out of plays easily with linemen moving up to the second level. So there's just so many signs of the Eagles being able to score a lot of points without doing anything crazy. And this is something that has kind of annoyed me is within the play calling, I noticed sometimes the Eagles are treating all these defenses like they're going against the 2000 Ravens. Like sometimes you can just line up, do some slants, some basic run plays, don't reinvent the wheel and just stick with it and have success. And they'll move down the field and then they'll pull out some random gadget play or throw a swing pass 8 yards behind the line or do a bubble screen or a quarterback draw from empty or when they motion the running back out. It's like you don't need to do that. And I understand like if they get up big and they want to experiment with some concepts and get some live reps, that's one thing and I understand it. But if you're just trying to throw the defense off when you're just better and you can go man on man and win, I'd rather do that, keep it straightforward, reduce the variance of terrible things happening and letting a bad team stick around in the game. Remember, this Panthers team almost beat the Chiefs and almost should have beat the Buccaneers. They're a competitive team. So it's like, don't reinvent the wheel. I don't think this is the game to do that. This is the game where you want to take your starters out in the third quarter and rest them for the stretch run. So that as far as highlighting their defensive guys, Derek Brown would have been the guy to do that because he's a tremendous defensive lineman who's out for the season. But after that, yeah, Jaycee Horn is one guy that we don't need to pick on.
Yeah, absolutely. So, having said, what you just said, let's jump into the Eagles' offensive game plan. Is there anything you'd do in specific? I mean, I know you said pretty much keep it basic and do what they do best, but is there anything else that you would do in specific?
I feel like I say that every week, and that's because the Eagles are built to have a straightforward offense and run simple schemes. I'll mention it for the third time. Their interior line is small guys who don't have a lot of strength. They will get absolutely bullied on gap scheme runs directly up the middle. I don't want to be running wide zone. I don't want to be running toss. I don't want to be running quarterback running laterally to the line of scrimmage and not able to get past anyone. I want to run straight up the gut for the most part. They rarely bring more than 5, so you can go big on big in pass protection. Put 5 players out on the routes. You're going to get 3 or 4 favorable matchups. Whoever Horn is guarding, who take him out, and then you've got 4 favorable matchups, especially against their single high defense. One thing that stuck out to me on tape is more than any other team, their entire defense slides with motion. Sometimes teams will just bump a player or two, but literally from their defensive line to their safeties, their entire team bumps over. It's kind of funny to watch, but that gives a big opportunity for counters, same side toss plays from shotgun, something that I haven't really seen this year that I've liked from the past. I'd love to see some stuff like that incorporated. This is a game where I know I said don't be too inventive, but if you want to put new installs this week, I think this is a good week to do it. Doesn't have to be a crazy exotic play, but just a new look. So all that said, I think there's a very good chance the Eagles score more than 27 points. And so that's how I would attack them. How about for you?
Yeah, so a lot of what you said in terms of, listen, do you need to go out there and try and target Jaycee Horn? No. Listen, there will be times where you can win on curl routes and comebacks against Jaycee Horn when they're playing off coverage. But in terms of like designer routes to attack someone, why not go at one of the weaker corners? The guy I would be going after is Mike Jackson. He is probably their weakest corner. He is getting targeted at a pretty high rate, the highest rate of any corner on this Panthers defense. So I would be going at Mike Jackson. He plays primarily on the outside opposite of Jaycee Horn. But in addition to that, run the ball. You're going to be able to run the ball against this team. I don't really need to come out and say run the ball. The Eagles are going to run the ball. They run the ball against everyone, even the league's best run defense. So they are going to run the ball. They're going to commit to it. I see zero reason why they are going to come out and start passing the ball all over the yard. I think they will be efficient when they do pass the ball, but we probably see Jalen Hurts at 25 pass attempts at the most, and it's probably going to be below that is my guess. But run against the worst run defense, control the clock, keep the defense off the field. When the type of runs I expect them to run a good amount of gap scheme runs, so pulling offensive linemen, especially against their 5-down fronts. We'll probably see some duo against those fronts as well, and some split zone. When you see them running zone one way and a tight end is slicing back across the formation another way, oftentimes that opens up a cutback between the outside linebacker and the defensive tackle playing inside of him. But those are the types of runs I'd expect when you see them come out, when you see the Panthers out in their 5-down fronts. I would expect more zone runs against their 4-down fronts, but I don't think you're going to see something brand new against this Panthers team. You talked about how they will shift everyone with motion. I expect that they'll probably run their jet sweep fake play where they send someone on a jet motion, you get everyone bumping over, and then they run outside zone back in that direction. You can get favorable matchups and the run game that way. Looking at some things they can do in the pass game, I talked about how when they come out against trips formations, you often see them with their weak safety as the guy that is responsible for taking number 3 vertical and across. I would create some plays to attack those coverages and specific. Number 1, you're going to get a one-on-one on the backside. Now, it's probably going to be Jaycee Horn, so that's probably not the matchup I'm going to go at a whole lot, but you'll also get a linebacker one-on-one with Saquon Barkley. So do we see a couple plays, maybe an option route early in the game so that they can set up the option and go like we saw against the Jacksonville Jaguars, right? Do you see it maybe a wheel route out of the backfield to try and get an explosive play with Saquon Barkley on a running back and coverage, something like that. But there's route combinations you can do to target and attack with your receivers down the field as well. For example, you could run crossing routes with your number 2 and number 3 receivers. That's going to remove both safeties, and then you can get the outside corner one-on-one with your number 1 receiver running something like a dig route over the middle, right? So just different ways where you can design plays to attack very specific coverage checks. But overall, I mean, it's going to come down to the fundamentals of just being good and pass protection, being able to create vertical and horizontal displacement along the line of scrimmage and the run game. Saquon Barkley is going to have a ton of room to work, and we know what happens when Saquon Barkley gets a ton of room to work. You see a lot of explosive play, so I do expect that to happen. Looking at some of the injuries on the offense, Devontae Smith is back practicing in full, so that is great. In case they do decide they want to shadow A.J. Brown with Jaycee Horn, you got your weapon, your Robin to pair with your Batman. So it looks like Devontae Smith should be playing this week. Dallas Goedert is likely out, so we're going to see a lot more Grant Calcaterra. CJ Uzoma was brought up and signed to the active roster. It'll remain to be seen how much 12 and 13 personnel they played. They ended up playing at the end of last game a good amount of 6 offensive lineman sets with Tyler Steen after Goddard went out. Maybe we see a little bit more of that. There was a game from Kellen Moore against the Titans in 2022 where they had one of their offensive linemen played fullback on like 7 snaps. Maybe we see some creativity that way and just using your personnel in different ways. But that does remain to be seen. Having said that, let's wrap this pig in a blanket and bring this home. What do you have for a score prediction?
Eagles 35, Panthers 17. Like I mentioned, I think the Eagles are very likely to score more than 27 points. Pretty much all the good offensives has put up good amount of points on the Panthers. There's no reason that they won't put up points, whether it's throwing, passing, or anything different. But I do think the Panthers, they don't give up, and they've rarely been blanked the whole season, and they have enough of a run game and a quarterback who's getting better each week where I don't think they're going to be shut out. Now, you might think Eagles defense, one of the best in the NFL. Are they? Does that measure up, reconcile with Panthers scoring 17? Not really. But if the Eagles go up big, there just might be a lot of possessions. That's probably one of the reasons why you mentioned the Eagles should try to limit possessions and just get out of there healthy and win solid game. But I don't think it's going to be a close game. How about for you?
Yeah, I agreed there. It's hard to, I mean, they're 12-point favorites from Vegas, so it's hard to see this Panthers team keeping it close. But since their week 5 bye, the Eagles have given up more than 20 points just one time. And that was in the game where the Jacksonville Jaguars got a fumble recovery that they returned for a touchdown. So this Eagles defense has not given up more than 20 points in any game since their week 5 bye. And they have played 3 top 5 scoring offenses in that span: the Cincinnati Bengals, the Washington Commanders, and the Baltimore Ravens. The Panthers have been playing better, but I'm not going to give them any more than 13 points. So I think that's what they will end up scoring. I do think it's hard to believe that the Panthers' league worst run defense is going to slow down the Eagles' league best rushing attack. It's their bread and butter. If you can't slow that down, and really no team has been able to do that for the entirety of a game this season, good luck stopping this offense. And I don't think the Panthers are going to be able to do that. The only thing that is going to slow this Eagles offense down is penalties that they commit, the false starts, illegal man downfield, just some of the dumb penalties that they've had. But they end up overcoming that because they create so many explosive plays. But on top of that, if you have turnovers or special teams blunders and you keep the game close, like we saw in the Jacksonville Jaguars game where they dominated them all game and had some mental mistakes, that's the only way I see the Panthers keeping it close, because they just don't have the talent to keep up with this Eagles team and what they're doing right now. So for that reason, I have the Eagles scoring 31 points. And the main reason I don't have them scoring more is because I predict they're going to have a constant running of the clock with how much they're probably going to run the ball. And then the fact that the Panthers give up completions at a very high rate. So you're probably going to see a lot of completions, a lot of running the ball, a lot of the clock running. So overall, I have the game Eagles 31, Panthers 13. But that will be it for today's preview episode. We will be back with the review podcast next week. But as always, remember to like, subscribe, and spread the word. Until next time, go Birds.